Great, thanks, Christopher, and welcome everybody. As Christopher mentioned, my name is Ashley St. Thomas. I'm the Public Policy Manager at the Arizona Food Bank Network. I'm excited to see some names of people I know. Shout out to Tori, glad that you're here, and happy to see some folks that I don't know, that I don't get to talk to regularly. And we're going to talk about advocacy, obviously, but first and foremost, I just want to thank Christopher. I want to, for putting all of this together. I learned a lot from the previous training, so hopefully you'll learn at least a little from this one. And if you have questions again throughout, please feel free to interrupt or put them in the chat and we'll get to them. So okay. So we're going to start with a quick poll just to see if the polling equipment is working and to see if you're awake. It's 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, so I'll turn that over to you, Christopher, to launch the poll.
I am getting it up right now. Everyone should be seeing it on their screens. Go ahead and let us know if you are tired of 2020 yet, or is it just us? Perfect, getting lots of responses. I'm gonna keep it up maybe just like 2 more seconds. A lot of people jumping in really quickly on that. Plus, I'm sure some people are logging in still. Perfect, we'll go ahead and close that. We got about 75% of people saying, yes, it's still 2020. Some people have no idea, and then other people believe that it's the year Tuesday. So.
Awesome. There are no wrong answers. We would have accepted anything. So no, it's a challenging time for a lot of people and a busy time. So really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk with us. Let's see. Yeah, oops. There's a delay on the slides. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So I'm going to talk obviously about nonprofit advocacy, in particular about policy advocacy. There are other types of advocacy that nonprofits can engage in related to litigation and administrative work, but we're going to focus on policy work today. And why it's important, some effective methods, some common barriers, and then some actions you can take right now that we as a network are already engaged in that you can kind of join us in our work. So, oops, sorry about that. Before I talk about nonprofit advocacy, I just want to kind of level set. I think we tend to assume we understand what the word advocacy means, and we probably do, but just there's no one definition for it, but it's the act or process of, supporting or opposing a cause, a social cause, a political cause. Certainly, there are plenty of those to go around right now. And so we're aiming to influence people to take action. Before we even talk about that, I'll tell you that the first advocacy campaign I can remember being involved in, I was about 12 or 13. My sister is a couple years older than me. And we lobbied our parents pretty hard for a second phone line, which gives you some insight into my age. And so we didn't have a computer, again, more insight. But we got poster board and we kind of really pitched them. We made this kind of chart and explanation of why it would be beneficial to the whole household. We put Post-its on the refrigerator and on the door so that, second phone line, don't forget. And then we even set up a meeting with them. They both worked full time, and we said one night after dinner, can we sit and talk about this? And we did. It was a cost benefit analysis, and I'm hesitant to tell you we didn't get that second phone line because my parents, said that we should focus on school. But my sister is now an attorney, and I get to do this great work, so I think it was beneficial. But that's also to say, advocacy. The best advocates are people who are passionate about what they're talking about. At that time, I was passionate about getting a second phone line, but nonprofits are particularly well positioned to talk about the work that they do because we're passionate about it. So our next poll already is a quick pop quiz, and I'll give Christopher a chance. There we go.
Yeah, so definitely, what is an example of nonprofit advocacy? And got nothing coming up yet. Oh, there we go. Got a few few polls coming in now. Give people probably till about the 30-second mark. Go ahead and get your votes in there so that way we can see what you're thinking. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and close this up, and I'm gonna share it with everybody here. We had a 40% thinking that it's the educating the public about your mission, and then the other 60% are urging policymakers to take action. So yeah, thanks for participating in that, everybody.
Yeah, good answers. And it was kind of a trick question because the answer is all of the above. But when you put that on, everybody knows that's the answer. So, so any of these things is an example of nonprofit advocacies, and a lot of them I'm sure that you're doing, and others that we'll talk about in a bit. You just may not label them advocacy, but education or raising awareness is a huge part of advocacy. And I would argue that advocacy is critical to achieving your mission. If you're working in the anti-hunger space in particular, and I'm sure some of you are from partner organizations working on other basic needs, but if we're not looking at the big picture and sort of trying to change things from a systemic long-term position, then we're going to continue to see the problem and the need that we see currently. So urging policymakers certainly to take action is a lot of times the end goal. Voter engagement is really important. We'll talk about that in a little bit, and something that's totally allowable. And grassroots lobbying is also allowable. So we'll talk about that. And so this just kind of underscores the point that the Arizona Food Bank Network, we talk about how advocacy is about shortening the line. So our food banks do an incredible job of meeting the need of emergency food assistance, but we know that federal nutrition programs, which is a lot of times what we're advocating about, feed 9 times as many people as one food box. So that's just our little catchy slogan there. Okay. So these are more examples of nonprofit advocacy. And as I mentioned, we're going to focus on policy advocacy or legislative, and that can come in many forms. A lot of times that's meeting directly with elected officials. And a lot of times that comes to us in the form of inviting those elected officials to tour your facility, or if you're a food bank, to volunteer there. And we've had some great meetings with folks as a result of that. It's challenging during COVID-19, obviously, but there are still opportunities to volunteer, of course. And educating those policymakers about hunger in Arizona, about the people that you serve. And lobbying, again, is something we'll talk about. There are limitations, but lobbying is certainly allowable and advisable. Administrative advocacy is a lot of what I do, and it's working more with the state agency or the federal agency once laws are put in place. How are those laws going to roll out? How are they going to be implemented? Under what governance? And that's really where a lot of great work gets done. And then we talk about elections. There's, you may or may not know, November 3rd is a big election, and you can be involved in voter registration, and nonpartisan voter and candidate education. And that's incredibly important because the folks that we see in our food bank lines, the families and the individuals, oftentimes don't get to have their voice heard. Getting to the polls has oftentimes been prohibitive. I think Arizona has done a great job to make to eliminate a lot of the barriers to voting that have existed in the past. And we'll have some web links at the end where you can, encourage folks to go and find out how they can vote early, how they can mail in their ballots, where they can do drive-through or drop-off ballot options. So we also have media is a great way to raise awareness for the problems. Letters to the editors, editorials, we have tons of templates for those kinds of things. And certainly social media. We just recently hired a new media or communications manager, and I don't want to put more work on her plate, but I hope someday she'll do a social media training because I could benefit from that. Research is important. Our advocacy is in some ways inherently biased. We are asking people to take action, and oftentimes a particular action, but we want it to be based on unbiased research and data and information. So we have fact sheets galore, and policymakers really appreciate when they're tailored specifically to their district. And then, excuse me, last but not least, storytelling. I've had the good fortune to be a part of a statewide ethical storytelling campaign for the past couple of years, where people get to be their own advocates. There's nothing about my job title that gives me, better insight into what's really going on and makes it so that I should be the person speaking to a member of Congress or a state legislator. It's just that oftentimes, obviously, people can't get there and they can't actually take time out of their day to make those conversations happen. So we share their stories. So what are some effective methods of nonprofit advocacy? A lot of what we already talked about, but let's just back up many steps. You might recognize some of these faces. And, Alexander Hamilton said that we don't have a government by the majority, we have a government by the majority to participate, AKA I want to be in the room where it happens, which is said by Aaron Burr in the recent play. But basically, it's important to keep in mind that elected officials have one job, and that's to get elected or re-elected. And that maybe sound overly simplified or cynical, and I don't mean it that way. Certainly, I know most, if not all, politicians or policymakers get into that work because they want to make change, but they can't do anything unless they get elected, right? So we want to constantly remind them as advocates what they're there for. So we tell them about the problem of hunger in Arizona and we propose solutions. And they listen to us because we have, direct hands-on experience. We're the people day to day who are working with families or are the families that are impacted by the policy decisions that they're making. And they also listen to us because we have expertise and data, but they really also listen to us because we have votes that they want. So this is a study, I don't know if you can see at the bottom, it's conducted by the Congressional Management Foundation every year. And they tailored their ask this year about how to influence legislation in the time of COVID-19. And I think it really opened up some access and made things a bit more equitable. So you can see that the number one thing that's persuasive from their staff is in-person issue visits from their constituents. But again, not everybody can fly over to Washington, D.C. to have those conversations, or even in district when your member of Congress is here. So we've been able to bring folks virtually into those meetings, which is great. And this also, you can see some of the other examples there about email contact is also important to them, but less so than actually talking face-to-face to a person. And this kind of demonstrates that politicians are people too. And again, I'm not trying to sound cynical, but what I mean is that people make decisions oftentimes based on their emotions. And so we can present a lot of facts and data to them, but it's a lot harder to argue with a person who says, if you cut funding for this particular program, I'm not going to be able to put food on the table for my kids. So in light of actually having those face-to-face meetings, we get to share these stories. And so we'll share this video that we just recently collected from this family, and they go to Encanto, their kids go to Encanto Elementary, and they were participating in the grab and go school meal option that was potentially going to be cut. So they're kind of talking about that right here.
also learning like where food comes from too. So there's in Canto Elementary, they get a local carrot, or they get carrots from a local farmer, and so they have on there, this carrot has been grown by a local farmer. So we send them boys about where carrots are coming from and how it's grown, and this is raised by a farmer near us. So it's really great. We love it. We're fortunate to have it.
This should be a non-starter. All right. I think education and the children need to be number one.
So, I mean, not as maybe a sole result or solely as a result of this video, but the USDA has extended that grab and go meal option because, advocates and families across the country reached out to them and said, this is critical. Our kids need meals during the pandemic, and this is how this has been working, and it's a great program. And that went to the USDA, so administrative advocacy, but also to members of Congress so that they could influence the administration as well. And, in under 1 minute, they captured the importance of that program in a way that I could not. So, sorry, there's a delay on my end with the slides. Apologies. Okay, there we go, thanks. So we want to make sure that we emphasize the personal ask, but we also want to balance that with research data and demonstrated impact. I won't read this whole slide to you, obviously, but this is a fact sheet that we put together in July, talking about all of the things that our food banks have done to meet the incredibly increased demand in their lines. I think something close to 1.3 million people in Arizona are expected to face hunger this year, which is, astounding. And our charitable food bank network can do a lot. Our current existing nutrition programs are doing a lot. But the flip side of that is what we were asking Congress to do in terms of coronavirus relief. So this is just an example of balancing both storytelling and facts. So just some more examples. As I mentioned earlier, we want to educate. A lot of advocacy is education. A lot of advocacy is awareness raising. So educating the public and educating elected officials. We recently had a webinar on nonpartisan voter engagement because, like I said, we want to make sure that everybody has access to the polls and that people are speaking on their own behalf, and that's the best way to do that. And these photos on the right are from our annual Food Bank Day at the Capitol, which mark your calendars. If the legislature reopens, that will be March 16th of 2021. And it's an opportunity for advocates from food banks and partner agencies. We brought a lot of folks from small pantries this past year, get to talk to their state lawmakers, sometimes for the first time, and just tell them what they do, and that's a form of education, and then also support our network's legislative agenda for that session. So, and also eat a delicious lunch from St. Mary's Food Bank. So hopefully stay tuned. We'll have the opportunity to do that in the spring. We want to be, again, we want to be a resource, and your reputation is really the #1 thing that allows you to be a resource. We have, Arizona Food Bank Network has existed since I think the early 1980s under a different name. And so over time, the development of relationships has made us a real resource where lawmakers reach out to us for our information. Raising awareness again through the media. Oh, and then our next pop quiz is talking about lobbying.
Yeah, let me get it ready here. So are public charities legally allowed to engage in limited amount or direct legislative lobbying? You all should see that popping up on your screen here shortly. Feel free to start getting those answers in. Getting a good split here, about an 80-20 split so far. We'll keep it open for a couple more seconds. We'll give it to the 25-second mark here. Go ahead and get them in, and perfect. So we got 71% say yes, and then 29% say no.
All right. Well, I'm glad to see there was some split there, but the correct answer is yes. That often is surprising to folks, and there are certainly limitations to what we can and cannot do, which I'll talk about in a minute. But direct legislative lobbying is really talking to a legislator or elected official about a particular piece of legislation and asking them to take a particular action. It's important to remember that the budget is a piece of legislation. So if we're asking for something from the budget, that's the exact same thing as talking about a particular bill. And that there are guidelines on what you can and cannot do. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. And this is the last sort of slide of examples, and this talks about lobbying. So in addition to educating the public and elected officials about hunger in Arizona or the work that you do, we also want to educate candidates. This is top of mind, of course, because the election is right around the corner. And this is an example from 2018 from the midterms. Then Congresswoman McSally was touring the St. Mary's Food Bank with Senator Susan Collins. The thing that we have to be mindful of is if we're inviting one candidate to do something, we have to invite all of the candidates who are running for that same position, because it doesn't, we don't want to appear to be endorsing any particular candidate. And also it's a good practice because we really want to give everybody the same information and make sure that they have a platform in place to respond, right? How would you address hunger in Arizona or in your district? Did you know that all of these food banks exist? We have maps of that too, if anybody wants that. That's a great resource for state lawmakers. Did you know this many kids in your district get free or reduced price meals in school? So it's just important to be balanced. And then on the other side, on the right-hand side, we have examples of lobbying. These are both actually, excuse me, grassroots lobbying. And these two examples are from recent requests to our senators to prioritize SNAP in coronavirus relief legislation. That said, the reason they're considered grassroots is because they're a call to action. If you read them, they say, we're asking our network to reach out to their senators. And it just happens to be by social media. So direct lobbying, I think I'll talk about in a couple more slides. So what else? These are all great examples. And it's just kind of to reiterate that advocacy campaigns have a lot involved in them. They're not one single thing. You want to use as many approaches as are applicable and appropriate to the particular thing that you're asking for. So we rely a lot on coalitions, partners, and allies. There are, if you're anything like me, I'm getting bombarded in my personal email with requests to sign on to things and to reach out to this particular lawmaker. But coalitions are most effective, I've found, when they're really a wide range, right? So we want to not only be food banks and nonprofits, but also for-profits. We work a lot with the Grocers Association because they accept SNAP benefits, and that's hugely helpful to not only their bottom line, but the local economy. We work with the Restaurant Association and schools. And the more people that can get onto a sign-on letter and variety of organizations, I should say, the better, the more persuasive. Two, here we have grassroots and grass tops. Excuse me. This just says, there's a place for everybody in advocacy, and community organizing at the neighborhood association level sometimes is more effective than working at the congressional level. But we want to make sure that we're utilizing folks on all ranges of the spectrum. And a lot of times our grass tops, that refers to our board members, is the first group that comes to mind, because a lot of times they have great connections with elected officials and other folks at high levels. So make sure that, you know, we're doing some network mapping of who everybody knows. Media, we talked about a little bit, but certainly local media is important, and putting editorials in papers besides just the Arizona Republic, in smaller papers where members of Congress and local lawmakers can be most affected. That's important, and we can do earned media and social media, and we can do probably a whole webinar on media. Visits and volunteering, we've talked about a little bit already, and then being a resource, like I said. In the past, Senator McCain's office would reach out to us for particular information because he liked to write his own letters about TFAP, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program. Those are the food boxes that our food banks give out to families. He never wanted to sign on to group letters, and we were just happy to, you know, be a resource and someone that his staff reached out to. So I think we're going to talk about common barriers to nonprofit advocacy, and I think we already saw one with your response to one of the poll questions. This is just a funny cartoon that talks about fear. So most barriers are fear-driven. That's all this is meant to say. It's not ad for you to steal office supplies. But to that point, what I hear a lot from, particularly from food pantries that are just getting started, is that they don't want to violate their tax exempt status, their 501c3 status, by lobbying, and they don't want to lose any support from either donors or currently we're hearing a lot about losing clients by seeming too political or too partisan. And I'll talk about those because that's the ones I'm familiar with, but I don't want to overstate that. We understand time and capacity constraints are often what prevent folks from advocating, and we are a resource for that. I will talk about in a little bit how you can get connected to our advocacy calls, where it makes it pretty easy for you to take action on something, because we know you're doing the hard work of serving families every day and don't necessarily have time to, you know, write an op-ed from start to finish, or even write an email to a member of Congress. That said, that decision about whether or not your organization wants to take those actions, that should be obviously an internal conversation with your staff and your board, but the time should, we want to eliminate time as a barrier. And I'm sure there are other barriers that I would love to hear from all of you, if you want to put anything in the chat about sort of what has prevented you to this point from getting involved in advocacy. So these are lobbying guidelines for nonprofits. These are very high level. Again, I talked about direct versus grassroots. One is sort of specifically asking about specific legislation, and the other is urging your members or your followers on social media to do that. So that's considered a call to action. On the do's are do those things. We want you to do those things and support nonpartisan election activities. On the don't side is the limitations, right? Lobbying can't be a substantial part of what a 501c3 does. And substantial is defined in different ways that I, as a non-lawyer, cannot advise you of. But there's a link there to the IRS page that kind of spells it out. A good rule of thumb that I have read is it can't be more than 20% and more than 5% of your time. So that's a tricky one. Congress was very vague about what they define as substantial and insubstantial, which is why talking to the Alliance for Justice, and their link will be on the next slide, or the last slide, is a really good resource for lobbying for nonprofits. And again, we can engage in election activities as long as they're not political or partisan. And even if, excuse me, let me back up. Let's say you start doing advocacy work and you find that you're really passionate about it, or that you're seeing how it's impacting the families that you serve and you want to do more. There are things actions you can take, steps you can take to do that without being in violation of your 501c3. It might mean registering as a lobbyist, but you know, there are folks that can walk you through that. It's not preventative. Okay, so we will talk about some advocacy actions that you could take right now that we're already taking, that we're working on. Again, get out the vote. Voter registration in Arizona was extended to October 23rd, which is exciting. It gives access to more people. These two, I think these are links in the slides, but these two websites, Arizona.vote and BeBallotReady.vote, will guide folks to how to register, where to vote, how to get a ballot, where to drop off a ballot. And we also have flyers that are customized for our food banks and have been distributing those at some of the drive-through distributions. Last week, we were at United Food Bank at their Mesa Convention Center distribution, and about 1,000 flyers to families as they were driving through to pick up food, and had some really great conversations about why they weren't planning to vote or were planning to vote. So I know that can be hard to get the word out now that we don't have, you know, resource boards galore at our food banks because people can't walk in, but there are still methods. And if you're looking for those kinds of flyers, send me an email and I can send them to you. Again, you can contact Senator Sinema and Senator McSally about much needed additional COVID-19 relief. If you've been reading the headlines, it's unlikely that there will be an additional piece of legislation that passes, certainly not before the election. But it's important to keep reminding them that, you know, folks are still struggling. And if you want to send our asks, I would be happy to provide those talking points for you. It's through the Senate at this point. I mean, sorry, a bill did pass the House, so that's why we would reach out targeted to the Senate. Mark your calendars, like I said, March 16th next year. Hopefully we'll get a chance to sit on the lawn and talk to our state lawmakers. And we're still finalizing our 2021 legislative agenda. But I know that one thing we'll be asking for is support for Friends of the Farm, which is our farm to food bank initiative that was launched last year. And we just hired a great new manager for that program. And it's really working with small growers to get locally produced food into the hands of families that come to our food bank. You can collect and share stories, yours and the people you serve. So we also want to hear from folks who do direct service and how COVID-19 has impacted them and their work. And, you know, if you're interested in developing what's called an ethical storytelling campaign, I'd be happy to share resources with you. We just always want to be careful of exploiting families, and that's why it's kind of developed with the word ethical in mind, because we don't want to just take from families and ask for money and then kind of leave them by the wayside. So, and then last but not least is PEBT outreach, which I am often guilty of speaking in acronyms, so I'll explain what that means. The pandemic EBT, or Electronic Benefits Transfer Program, is a new program that was developed during the pandemic to get additional benefits to families who their kids were previously getting free or reduced price meals when schools were open. And again, that has been extended through September 2021, which is great. The state has to sort of develop those administrative rules of how they're going to get those benefits out now that schools are, some are open and some are not. What's that going to look like? But we know that it was really hard for them to get benefits to families in rural, really remote rural areas of the state, some tribal communities, and some other places. And so we want to work with the state to do outreach and make sure that families know that benefit is available and how they can get it. So if you do any work with schools or families, or if you are a school, it would be great to touch base with you. Oops. And this is another slide full of resources. So our new website is beautiful, and our team did a fantastic job on that. I can't take any credit, but it's up and running, and you can join our anti-hunger advocacy network and get updates through that link. And then, like I said, join our anti-hunger advocacy calls. They're actually Zooms now, so we'll probably put some of the recordings on the new website. They're every other Friday at noon. This Friday is one of the upcoming ones, and I know that we have a guest speaker who's going to talk about the eviction moratorium lifting and some other deadlines that affect the people in our food bank lines. So please join us for that. We do it in partnership with the Arizona Food Systems Network, so you can get notifications about the Zoom link, and the calendar invites through that website. Sign up for their newsletter. And these are just some other links of tools that I've talked about. Boulder Advocacy is an initiative of the Alliance for Justice, and they do a really great job of providing resources and making it clear what nonprofits can and cannot do. Last but not least, this is a quote from one of my favorite authors. And I think this is, again, reiterates why it's important for nonprofits to engage in advocacy, because you guys care a whole awful lot. And I think, yeah, that's it from me. Christopher, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your intelligence and everything that you know about advocating. I learned a lot already today myself. I do want to say to some of the attendees, please drop any questions that you have for Ashley in the question box. We'll go ahead and ask her those and get you answered. I do have a couple here already though for you, Ashley, so I hope you're ready. I have one that says, how or why is advocating, so I guess more it's like, how is advocating going to support the sustainability of someone's organization?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, we oftentimes say that we want to kind of put ourselves out of business, because if we did, that would mean there was no more hunger. But if we're doing advocacy work around policy, I think it's really going to ensure that there's a place and a space for nonprofits to operate to meet emergency needs, and that the food, if we're talking about food banks in particular, that the food that they serve to their clients is going to be available, accessible, and nutritious. In terms of sustainability, that's kind of what I would look toward. Is that what, do you mean sustainability financially, or just environmentally, or I guess
I guess all the above. I mean, sustainability is just like the longevity of somebody's organization, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think advocacy is a key part of that. We want to make sure that, you know, everything doesn't, that well, I'll just say that nonprofits continue to have a space to do the work that they do, and that policy can shape that.
Definitely. Perfect. Nice. Got a question that just came in that says, the program has great experiences with elderly population. How can we spread the word? The AZ Food Bank Network funding has been an immense support during this critical time. Does that make sense? Did I read it? Should I read it one more time?
Yeah, can you read it one more time?
Sure. This says, the program has a great experiences with elderly population. How can we spread the word that the Arizona Food Bank Network funding has been an immense support during this critical time?
Tell everyone you know. No, I'm so glad to hear that. That's awesome and encouraging. I'm not sure what part of the state you're in, but that's also always really good to know if folks are outside of Maricopa County and they're getting assistance, and also serving seniors. Obviously, that the pandemic has brought to light a lot of the gaps in various systems, including the food system. And when folks are stuck at home, how do we get emergency food to them? So I know that all of our partners, our food banks, our members, and various partners throughout the state, the Area Agency on Aging, have done a phenomenal job of getting food to people instead of getting people to food. And a lot of the funding that our network, and Christopher, you can probably speak to this better than I can, was able to disperse, came from various different sources, sort of individually raised, state dollars, city dollars, federal dollars. So I think that's another example of how, sustainability in terms of advocating for sustainability or keeping food banks able to operate. It involves that coalition of public-private networks. But I would say if you have a website, if you have social media channels, if you want to come join our advocacy call and talk to folks about that, the work that you do, I would certainly welcome that. We talk about seniors a lot, and there's only one federal nutrition program that's specifically targeted towards seniors. It's CSFP, Commodity Senior Food Program. And there are many challenges in that, so I'm never sure who to ask specifically to talk about senior hunger. So if you are interested and willing, please reach out to me.
Perfect. They say they would love to do that. I'm assuming joining on the advocacy calls. So looks like they're going to be jumping in. Perfect. I have another question here. Pretty simple one, maybe. Who at your organization or at a organization should be advocating?
That's another great question. So I think that is an internal decision that an organization needs to make for itself. I'm always mindful of not giving that level of advice because I don't know the internal workings of your food bank or your food pantry. I think I would like to say everyone should, but I think that's a conversation that needs to start internally, whether that's at the executive level or staff level. One of our food banks is coming to mind, and they have great communication within all levels of their staff. And so I know that there was some tension at one point of folks signing on to letters on behalf of the organization. I think it's just something that needs to be discussed up front. But who can do that work the answer is anybody. A lot of times it is the executive director or the CEO because they're the most forward-facing and well-known. But advocacy is available to anyone. But I would say that developing a strategy we have advocacy or policy priorities, so things that we're going to take a stance on, which is typically anything that is going to impact access to food and access to benefits in Arizona. So we had a statement on public charge, which was a rule I'm sure you're all familiar with that kind of made a lot of barriers to immigrant families accessing benefits. And we took a position on it because it directly affected their access to SNAP or food stamps. And our board, we wrote statements and we did press briefings because it fell within that purview. And that's just something that I think each organization has to determine for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I was muted. I was talking, but I was muted. I don't have any more questions in the chat boxes or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to open up, Ashley, any closing statements, anything you want to say before we kind of move on to just the conclusion here?
No, I just want to thank everybody for participating. And the person who jumped in about senior hunger, I think one other thing I should say is that if you're willing to have conversations with state or federal officials, I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. There isn't any one person who works on, senior issues more than others, but certainly, that's something that folks need to know, that is a problem, and here's a way that we're solving it. So thanks for that example.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Maybe I can get this moving. There we go. Perfect. So, all right. So a couple last minutes things here, just so you all know. These trainings are coming often. We're going to be touching on all kinds of things like today, advocacy. We have recordings of past ones on volunteer management as well as fundraising. We're going to have some more things coming up. There's also an entire toolkit that we are putting together. It's going to be coming soon. There's going to be a whole training on sustainability in itself and what sustainability is and why it's good for your organization. And we're also going to kind of take you through the toolkit so you know how to use that toolkit. But if I don't have any more questions for Ashley or I, in the question box, if you think of something afterwards, please take down our email addresses and reach out to us. We are happy to help out. Connect you with the right people if we don't know the answers to something, or connect you with the people about senior hunger or school hunger or other kind of things. So I appreciate everyone for joining us today. Ashley, I know I gave you a second, but do you want anything else to say? Anything that comes to mind?
Nope, just thank you. Really appreciate it. I know everybody's probably had a pretty long day and you do a lot of great work. So thanks for joining.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and leave this up on the screen for just a second, but feel free to take down our email addresses or log off if you need to get something. But I'm going to hang out for just a second. Thank you again, Ashley, for your time and your experience with advocacy. And we'll see you all next time.